Okay, hi and welcome to you all. This is Erik Svensen. I have the pleasure of presenting a webinar today about testing and validating and debugging your M code. Yeah, a little bit about me. I'm a Microsoft MVP and data platform section. I'm the POC leader of the Danish Power BI user group. And my day-to-day job is partner at a company called Catman Solution, where we deliver a BI as a service solution for suppliers within the fast-moving consumer goods. So my day-to-day work is working with Power BI. I have a background as an Excel developer. I have worked with SQL Server Analysis Services, Reporting Services, MDX, but now it's primarily Power BI, M, and DAX, and Azure Analysis Services. And yeah, I've been working with Power BI since its beginning. So my first certification was in Excel 5.0 and worked with Microsoft Query and a lot of VBA. And if you have questions or things you want to hear about, please reach out, read my blog at eriksvensen.wordpress.com or reach out at Twitter or send me an email. But let's kick right in. Testing your Power Queries. If you do a web search for testing Power Queries, you actually get a few and very irrelevant results. So a couple of weeks ago, I searched for test Power Query, and as you can see, the result was 497 results. So we don't get much help there. When we do our queries, error messages in Power Query are not always specifically helpful. So for instance, this one, failed to save modifications to the server. Well, in this case, I tried to import data from an Excel file, so I actually don't use the server. So what's the last message? The key didn't match any rows in the table. What? That's comes from this one actually within the Power Query. And if we look closer, we'll see that actually one of our transformations, or this is calling a custom function, actually returns an error. So when you get this first error message in the interface, yeah, we actually have to dig into the Power Query in order to fix our results. And sometimes we do get a little help. When we apply query changes, we sometimes get notice that it contains errors, and then it's able to load the file, but it will generate a separate query where it filters out all the error rows. You should remember, as I claim here, that remember to clean up your model afterwards. When we develop our models, we can get a lot of these. So these are only deleted if you delete them. They're not loaded into the model. They are automatically set to not to be loaded. So you won't see it directly in your model. So how to resolve these challenges? Well, as a famous agent, he also had a bit of a helper, Q. So we do have to know about the query behind, and especially the M language behind Power Query. So these are the things you should absolutely know about Power Query. First, the hashtag shared. I'll demo that in a while, but that will give you a list of all the functions that we have available in Power Query. And you can find documentation as well within Power Query, so you don't have to browse to the document.microsoft.org in order to find how the different functions work. And then you can refer to any step in your query. So when we do work in the advanced editor, we can use any previous step in our code and refer to that, and also extract values from that and reuse or recall in steps after we actually have passed that previous step. And a lot of the functions that you use using the ribbon in the Power Query editor, they can actually do a little bit more. Just as we know from Excel, there are some optional arguments, and these are also present in the M language. So, for instance, the rename column or remove columns, that has an optional argument how to handle if a field is missing, for instance. So also by knowing the M language, you will also be able to make your queries even more error-proof and handle any errors that might occur when data changes or the file format changes, or whatever. And you should also know that when you do record your steps, it records the absolute references. So when you select a file using the interface, for instance, it will use that name in the query. It will pick that column. It will remove that column name. And you don't necessarily always want to do that. So we can make our queries more flexible. And when we work with Power Query, these are actually the things, the basics that you need to know about. Query is all about that we have lists of records and tables with records, and that indexes is zero-based within Power Query. So when we look at a very simple table, we can see that this is a list of first name and last names. The icon in the upper left corner indicates that this is a table. The row is actually a record within a table, and row number 1 is table. This is called table 1, and then the curly brackets with a 0, that will actually return the first row in our table. And a table contains actually columns, and each column can also be referred to as a list. So table bracket first name, that will return a list of first names in your table. And we can refer to tables in other queries to get, for instance, extract a list of first names. You should also think about that using the these two signs, you will be able to comment your code. When we develop our M queries, we will afterwards give us a big favor. Then if we do special things in our code, put comments in that describes what we're actually doing in the different steps. You should also know that you can rename your steps. So even though the naming will be quite obvious for us, it's a very good idea to actually rename the steps. So it's not just change data type, but what we are actually doing, or select columns or remove columns. Describe what you're actually doing in the step, and try to avoid using spaces. That will make it easier to write your code in hand in the advanced editor and refer to previous steps. And then you should also think about minimizing the steps. Some of the functions that we call in the using the ribbon, that will normally, when we do that, sometimes we actually have to do 2 steps in order to insert a custom column. First, we insert the custom column, and then we'll rename it afterwards. That can actually be done in 1 step instead, just by modifying the M code. That will make your code much easier to read, And remember that someday somebody else will have to read your queries. So clean up after you. That will also help you when you look at it in 6 months or 7 months. But let's see some demos and see what we can do. And you'll get a copy of the files, the PBIX file and the demo files afterwards. I'll sure that Jan will provide a link where you can download the files from. So let's switch over to our Power Query editor. And the first thing that I wanted to show you is the function shared. So as I mentioned, you can add a blank query, and then by typing in #shared, you will get a list of all the functions and tables, etc., that you have in your PBIX file, but you will also get a list of all the functions that are in the Power Query language. So we can turn this into a table, and then we can actually filter using the normal steps that we know. So if we want to know about how to table rename columns, we can find the name. And when we click on the function, you'll see at the bottom, we actually have the full documentation of the function and example codes included as well. And notice that this function, for instance, has an optional argument called missing fields. That is not exposed via the interface, and the missing field actually enables us to say what should Power Query do if if for some reason it should refer to a column name that doesn't exist, and then we can actually say it should use null instead or missing field ignore, so it should just ignore the error, and then the rest of the steps in your query might function no matter that the data doesn't contain that column anymore. But let's look at some fundamental things. So, for instance, this is a very simple list generated using the equal and then the curly bracket 1 and then dot dot to 20. That will give a list of values, right? And you can also see in the top left corner that this is just a simple list of values. These will also be returned to your model, and you can modify this and go to 23 instead. And you could also just type in names, and you'll get a list of names. So let's add another one, Jan, and we'll get a list of names. So a lot of the functions that we use in Power Query will refer to lists. So by knowing this, you can actually construct your own list within the query just by typing like this. Now let's switch back to 1 to 20. But what if I wanted a specific item in the list? Well, you can refer to another element in a blank query or any other query by referring to the table /list, and then the curly bracket will, sorry about that, I'll just mute me, say not disturb. And so if I wanted the first item, that is the 1, which I can like this, or if I wanted the 5th element, we will get number 6. And remember, it's starting from 0. So when I type in 5, I'll get the 6th element in my list. So you can also construct tables. You might have at some point used this one to enter data. But in this case, I have created a simple list of first name and last name just by typing it in. So that's a table. And also notice the icon in the upper left corner, it's a table. We can now refer to the first row in our table by using the reference to a table and using the curly bracket 0. That will return the first record. So that will give us this. As you can see, when I click here, this will be the first record. And that is returned like this. Okay. And we could work further on into a table, etc. We can also refer to a cell within a table. So if I wanted the first name of the first record in our table, I could refer to the table and then using the brackets and name of the column, that's first name, and the first record or cell within that list, it will return Jan. So by knowing these reference points, you can refer to any column or row within your tables or lists. You can also create a list from a table, simply by typing in again a reference to the table and the bracket first name, that will return a list of names in the table. So if you wanted a list of first names, simply type in the table name and the column name in brackets. And as I mentioned, we can refer to any step in our query anywhere. So let's open up the advanced editor and have a look at what I'm referring to here. So in this case, I have a very simple query. I'm saying A equals 1, B equals 2, and C equals A plus B. And then I've added a fourth step called D equals 10. But when I return something from this query, I'm returning C. So even though I have a step here called D, our query will return whatever step I'm referring to here. I can also move the steps. So I could do like this. That doesn't matter because you say that M sort of functions like Excel. When it evaluates, when it looks at C, it will look at C up here, find out that we refer to step A and B. That will then be A here and B here. And when we return that, it will again be 3. We could also change the result, saying that now I want D instead, and I'll get D returned. I can also say A plus here, and that will return 11. You will notice if you do this, you'll sometimes the query pane over here won't be able to list your steps. So you should think about that when you move your steps around in your advanced editor. Okay, let's have a look at an example where we have some Excel files. In this case, I have 3 Excel files that I want to load into my model. It's fairly simple Excel files. It's just 3 sales files, one for each month or week. Just to give you an idea how it looks, we will open the file and you'll see that we have a sales date, We have a product column and a sales value column, etc. And we have 3 of those. And we could then say, oh, I want to import this data, and I could switch to the file and go to folder, click connect, browse to the folder, just this one, cancel this, like this. That will open up a list of files, and then we could say that I want to use the combine and edit function. The combine and edit will create a function and a set of example files. But in order to do that, we first need to actually pick one of the files and say, how does it look? We could ignore files with errors, but in this case, I don't want to do that. This will generate the automatic transformation generation, load the first file, then move on to the next file. Hopefully. Load this one. Okay, so now we get a step here with all the files loaded. But we do have a problem, because I did actually, in this case step, as you can see, that I did put in a little trick, because the last file actually contains an error. When we click on the error, you'll see that an error occurred in the transform file, etc. The key didn't match any rows in the table. The key was a record and the table was table. Doesn't give us much help. And what actually happened in this step was it called the function up here, transform file from demo data. And we can use this one actually to change that function. What actually happens when we did all this? Well, it created this file, and the problem is actually as a result of this. So when you pick elements from a file, you'll see that the source in step 2 is actually referring to item sheet 1, and it's kind sheet. Just to give you an idea of what that refers to is that when we look at the source here, the Excel workbook connector will return a list of sheets and tables, and it refers to sheet 1 and the data in the table, this one. But when we navigate using this, it will hardcode the item name and the kind and refer to the column data. And this is actually the problem, because the file of March here actually is not called sheet 1. This is generated from by another user. So the sheet 1 is not called sheet 1, it's called sales, as you can see here. And that causes our Power Query to fail. Now, the same file the March file only has one sheet. So we do know that we actually want to import the first sheet in our Excel file. So instead of getting the file here, we can actually refer to the first rows. So instead of this one, we have to modify this. So I can simply click in the formula here, and this can then be the first record, that is zero based, and then the column data, and it will give me the result. Exactly the same. And now if I switch over to the demo data and go to the function and refresh this preview, it should hopefully work. Or did I change the wrong one? Perhaps, let me see. Transform. Yeah, I needed to change up here. Okay, modify this one. 0, get the first sheet, and we'll get the files, and the last column is still an error. It's because I've had the file opened. So let's close this one and refresh our preview. And now we get a table returned, and we can import the data. I prefer to write my functions by hand. So I recommend that you create your own combine function. And that is actually fairly easy. That is actually to create your own function. It also gives you an ability to debug your function a little bit better. So what I normally do is create a function like this. And as you can see, I've commented my code. So it will enable me to do like this. So instead of the source and refer to a specific file, I can comment out all my steps here. So I create a function that's called result. It has an argument as a file name, and that should be the name of the file. And I call the source the Excel workbook, and then put in the file name from up here. Same way, I can modify this one to say that should be the first row and the column data. And we promote the headers and transform the data types. Click done. And now it's a function that I can use in my folder function down here. And let's finish this by invoking the function. Call the fx data in the file. The file name should be a column name. It should be the file name. Now I have a table out here, and I can do the normal steps in order to expand, see the results, and do it like this. Get the same result. But what I can do is, if my functions for some reason fails, I can go in the advanced editor, and then I can hot comment the function part here. And then in order to test one of the files, I can actually create a file name here, refer to the list of files that I have in my folder, refer to the first column and the data. And so if I wanted to test the second file or the third file or file number 300, I can do like this. A very easy way of modifying and testing the function when you have a lot of files. Now let's have a look at another issue. What if I created an import of a file? For instance, the the January file has a sales column and sales value. I navigate in, promote the headers, and we'll see that the file contains a sales value and a sales unit. But when I import the February data, you'll see that when we navigate, we don't have the sales unit column in this file. That means that when we promote headers, that will work, but when we change type, because we try to set the data type for sales unit to a whole number, our query will fail. It will, in this case, give a sort of a reasonable error message. The column sales unit of this table wasn't found. So how can we handle this? We don't want this to fail. It might be that we want it to be replaced by something, and then we can switch back and find out, does the function table transform column types actually have some optional arguments? Oops. No, it doesn't. So we have to do something else. So we can't say missing field, ignore error. It doesn't work in this case, so we have to actually do something else. So in our promote headers, we have to create a function. So let's get result the file name as text, and that should return this in result here. And instead of calling this one, we should do file name here. And instead of referring hard copy to the names, we should refer to this. Then let's have a look at importing from a folder. Browse. That was the wrong one. Let's switch to this one. That was bad data. Edit this one. We need to combine the two file names. We can use that by using the merge column up here by selecting the columns. That will give us a column here. And as you can see, the name is actually merged now, and then you will typically double click here and type file name, right? But notice the step up here, it actually says what the name should be, so we can limit the number of steps simply by modifying the step here. Oops. Then we can invoke the custom function. That's a file with the column. Use the file name to send into the function. And now, Now we have the 2, and we can delete all the other columns. We expand this, you'll see that the first column actually has the sales units. When we click OK, we actually get a null value returned. So make sure that the first file is correct. That will enable you to expand the table columns without having an arrow on the next file. Now, we do actually have some sort of error handling in the query language. We do actually have a try function. So if we call a function, we can put a try keyword in front and then try something and then tell it otherwise return another thing. So in this case, I'm trying to convert the hooray text to a number. That doesn't go well, then it will return oh no. So if I had a text in here, that won't fail, and we'll see hopefully a number 1, 2, 3. So when you call procedures or functions within, you can use the try to determine what should happen when you do something, and if it doesn't work, otherwise return another thing. We can also expand that. So if we look at this example, here we have a combination of numbers and string. So when we call the and set the first column to to values, you'll see then error in the third record. Now, if you just use the try statement on a column, so in this case we'll add a column saying try column 1. That will return a record. And when we use try, you'll see that in the statement below here that the third one actually has an arrow. And we can add another one by calling try custom error. That can extract the error text, otherwise null. It will still be returned as a record. And when we expand, we actually get a description of what the error message is. It means that we can perhaps help our users when they import wrong data, etc., and give them a message back what actually happened if the query couldn't be updated. We can also use that in order, for instance, to well, we also have an if statement. So in this case, I'll try and add a column called custom. And then for each of these, I can input an if statement. So if column 1 divided by column 2 returns infinity, then I can type in the text, oops, or else I can return 1. So that means that we can modify what should happen if something is wrong with the data or unexpected data is in the file, and we can add that by incorporating in an if statement. Yeah, that's the same example just typed in here. Okay. Sometimes we do have a lot of data. So for instance, if we look at this folder, we have a lot of Excel files, about 432, and we want to import that. That shouldn't be too hard. So if we go to the source, you can see that we'll use the connector folder and read into my file with a lot of Excel files. We merge to get a file name using the folder path and name, and we remove some extra column, and then I invoke a custom function. Simply like the other ones, it reads the first sheet in the file, but now I know that's one file out of the 400 files that has an error. As you can see on the icon at the top here, we are not able to filter this. As it returns a table, it will not give us the possibility to filter and find the file that has the error. We can scroll down and see if we can find the file. No, it's not possible. So I need sort of a checker of showing find the error files. So what I've done is I've created a parameter here called show errors, and that's set to true. To false. So when I set this to true and return to my function here, now I'm able to see that I actually have one file that has an error. And what did I write up here? So instead of just referring to the function, I put in an if statement. So if show errors, that is my parameter that is now true, it uses then the function table select rows with error from the previous text that's called invoke custom function. And then it should look at the column fx read one file. That's the last column. Otherwise, it should simply return the previous step. So if you look at the advanced editor, that is of course exactly the same. But as you can see, that when I refer to this step, that's the great thing about our new intelligence. When I click that, you can see it's highlighted in a little bit darker gray. It will return this one. Otherwise, don't do the select rows. And then cancel this one. Yeah, that's okay. Then we can try and expand this one, and we actually get an error message specifically on the file that is wrong, and say the column sales date was not found. Then I can go to the previous and say what is actually the file. It's this one. I can navigate to my folder. It will open the file. And as you can see, there's something wrong with this file. This is just to annoy the Power BI developer, apparently. And now I can either make sure that whoever created this file gets an angry email, or we can delete the file from the folder. So returning to this one, let's see if I can find it. I should have. It's this one. So let's simply delete this one and return here. When I click refresh preview, we should hopefully see an empty list of files with errors. Yeah, the list of files are now empty, and I can switch back to show errors and say we don't want to see the error files, and we'll see all the data incorporated. And the step here is now only the files that can return a table. Okay. Last two things is, reduce the number of steps that you're creating in queries, and remember to rename them. For instance, if you add a custom column where we refer, let's just say, to the customer ID and add for do it like this. You notice in the interface that we can rename it. If you do like this and give it another name, you'll see that we get actually two names here. So instead of that, we could have done this here. Just call it test. It will rename the column. This will now fail because we don't have the step. If you do a transformation of this one, for instance, to a whole number, you will see that we get the change type here. If we wanted to change this one to no, that's it. Sorry. Yeah, think about how many steps you get here, and sometimes you can rename the steps directly in the step up here. So not the step, rename the field names. Another thing is to think about, in this case, I have the same query. I add an index, and instead of doing this in two steps, when I add it, I will do this in one step, so I can rename the column directly. It will now be called index. I can click on this one. Sorry, that was a wrong example. Let's add another column. This is another. Okay. Now, as you can see, the step is called added a custom. First of all, let's rename this. Let's rename this step. So add a custom text. And I don't use spaces because when I refer to this step later on in my code, I don't have to type in the reference with a hashtag and then add a custom like we did previously. That will make your queries easier to read, hopefully. And that's it. So this is T and add a, oops, that was something on the clipboard. Like this. G. Normally, if you have spaces, you will see that we need to type in like this, make it harder to edit your queries. So that was actually my example for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them using the chat, or Jan, you could say if we miss any questions during the session.
No, so far there have been no questions yet.
Yeah.
I love how you featured me in the demo, by the way, in the slides.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there really are no questions and you are finished, then that's nice.
Yeah.
Doesn't always have to be the full hour.
No, we'll just give them perhaps a couple of minutes to.
Mary Fieldy, you know her probably.
Yeah.
She says thanks.
You're welcome, Mary. Hope you learned something.
Yeah, it was pretty nice. Even I learned something. Ha.
Great.
She says that was great. And it is.
Good.
Yeah. I suppose if nobody else has anything, then
Yeah.
we can.
Otherwise, yeah, feel free to reach out on Twitter or send me an email or study my blog post.
Yeah.
I write a lot of about
Sorry.
Power Query. Yeah.
I already gave you access to a Dropbox location where you can put all the files, and
Perfect.
posted a link in the meetup, so
Yeah.
people can check there if they want. So yeah, great. Thank you very much.
You're
And
welcome.
yeah, hopefully we'll see you again, maybe in January at the new Power BI days. Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe in person this time.
Yeah, well, go submit.
Yeah.
The call for speakers is open.
Yeah. What would you like to hear about?
That's a good question.
Anything. The new
So
Power Query in Microsoft Flow, for instance.
that could be nice.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about sending the questionnaire to people. Al says that maybe you can talk in Amsterdam in March. I don't know what's going on. Oh, it's the PBI user group event in March, isn't it not?
Yeah.
In Amsterdam. Don't they have a summit there?
Yeah, I plan to go there and hopefully speak if I get selected.
Yeah, I still need to submit to that. That's
Yeah.
I need to submit to everything. Oh.
I don't think the call for speakers is open yet, and
Oh, in that case, I'm fine.
yeah. But they are looking for people to the program committees, and you can apply for that
Okay.
as
I was in a program committee for
as a
Sweden.
pod leader. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do it again.
Yeah.
Okay, Alain Peters is asking for materials. Yes, Alain, well, not yet. Erik is going to upload them on Dropbox when he has time, tonight, tomorrow. The link to the Dropbox folder is already posted on Meetup, on our on my meetup.com page. And yeah, when Erik uploads them, you will see them automatically appear there.
Yeah, and I'll even upload all the 432 Excel files.
Please skip them.
They're very small, so it shouldn't cause a problem. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I wish you a great evening.
You
And
too.
thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
See you
Good.
later.
Bye.
Bye.